It was supposed to be the perfect summer. The beach house, nestled by the ocean, had been in their family for generations. To Sarah, the successful lawyer with a meticulous eye for detail, it was more than just a house. It was a legacy. It was a place of memories, laughter, and shared moments with her sister, Rachel, whom she had always trusted. But everything changed when Sarah received a phone call that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her family. "Sarah, I sold it." Rachel's voice was casual, almost nonchalant. The words echoed in Sarah's mind, each syllable sinking like a stone. Her stomach churned as her thoughts raced. "What do you mean you sold it?" Sarah's voice barely contained the shock, her heart racing. Their grandmother's beach house, the one place they both vowed to preserve forever, was no longer theirs. Rachel had made the decision on her own, without consulting Sarah, without considering the family bond they shared. As Sarah hung up the phone, a chill crept through her. The more she thought about it, the more the idea of Rachel's betrayal gnawed at her. The sale wasn't just about the house. It was about something far more significant, something she hadn't considered. What was behind Rachel's decision, and what had she kept hidden? With a sense of growing unease, Sarah quickly began to piece together the situation. The sale wasn't just a simple real estate transaction. It was illegal. There was a clause in the deed, a clause that made the sale invalid. Sarah felt her heart beat faster as she realized what this meant. Rachel hadn't just sold the house, she had betrayed their grandmother's wishes. But as she began digging deeper, Sarah stumbled upon a strange discovery, a mysterious old key left behind by their grandmother. Why had it been hidden? And why had Rachel never mentioned it? It wasn't just about a family heirloom anymore. There was something darker at play, and Sarah was determined to uncover it. But little did she know, Rachel's betrayal was only the beginning of a much larger web of lies, secrets, and financial ruin waiting to be exposed. As Sarah prepared to confront Rachel, a sense of dread lingered. The beach house, once a symbol of family unity, was now the battleground for a fierce legal war. But would Sarah's quest for justice come at a price she wasn't ready to pay? Sarah's mind raced as she sat at her desk, the phone still warm in her hand after her conversation with Rachel. The shock of her sister's betrayal was beginning to settle into a quiet rage. She had to act fast. Rachel's sale of the beach house wasn't just illegal, it was a violation of their grandmother's wishes. There was no turning back now. But Sarah knew that the key to unraveling this mess lay not just in the deed, but in the house itself. She remembered the stories their grandmother used to tell, about hidden treasures and old family secrets buried in the walls of the beach house. But there was one thing their grandmother had never mentioned: a hidden safe. In her pursuit of answers, Sarah reached out to their grandmother's longtime attorney, Mr. Daniels, who had always handled the family's legal affairs. When Sarah explained the situation, he listened carefully, then sighed deeply. "There's something you need to know, Sarah," Mr. Daniels said, his voice gravelly over the phone. "Your grandmother left something behind for you. Something important." She was always prepared. Sarah's pulse quickened. What did he mean? Had her grandmother known something was coming? "You should go to the beach house. There's a safe hidden in the study, behind the bookshelf. Your grandmother kept it locked for a reason." The next morning, Sarah wasted no time. She drove to the beach house, her mind swirling with questions. The air was thick with tension as she approached the front door. The house, which once felt like home, now seemed cold and unwelcoming. Inside, the rooms were exactly as she remembered. Dusty furniture, photographs on the walls, the scent of the sea breeze drifting through the open windows. But there was no time for nostalgia. Sarah headed straight for the study, a room she hadn't entered in years. Her heart pounded as she pulled the bookshelf aside, revealing the hidden compartment. Behind it, nestled in the corner, was a sturdy metal safe. Sarah's hands trembled as she entered the combination she knew by heart, the one her grandmother had trusted her with. The lock clicked open. Inside, Sarah found a collection of old documents, some brittle with age. But one letter stood out, its edges frayed, the handwriting unmistakable. It was from her grandmother, written years ago. The letter, dated just before her death, revealed a shocking truth. The sale of the beach house had been illegal from the start. There was a clause in the amended deed, one that made the transfer of ownership void. It was clear Rachel had no legal right to sell the house. But there was more. Among the papers was a letter from her grandmother that read, "You may not understand now, but I've left something behind for you. Something that will help when the time comes. Trust your instincts." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What had her grandmother known? She quickly gathered the documents and rushed to Mr. Daniels' office, her mind reeling. The truth was beginning to unfold, but what Sarah didn't know was that this discovery was only the beginning. Rachel's betrayal ran much deeper than she had ever imagined, and Sarah was about to uncover a financial scandal that would shake the very foundation of her family. With the letter in hand and the documents as evidence, Sarah knew one thing for sure. The fight for the beach house was far from over. But as she prepared to confront Rachel, a dark realization settled in. There were forces at work far beyond her control, and they were only just beginning to make their presence known. Sarah stood in front of the courtroom, her nerves steadied by the evidence she had uncovered. The documents from the hidden safe, the fraudulent deed, and her grandmother's letter, everything pointed to one undeniable truth. Rachel had betrayed not only her, but their entire family's legacy. As she entered the family lawyer's office, she was greeted by a tense silence. Her sister Rachel sat across from their attorney, her face tight with apprehension. Next to her was her husband, Ben, whose smug expression barely masked the unease in his eyes. It was clear that this meeting was not going to go as Rachel had planned. Sarah, their attorney, Mr. Daniels, greeted her with a nod. "I'm glad you made it. We've got a lot to discuss." Rachel's eyes narrowed as Sarah took a seat across from her. The tension in the room was palpable, but Sarah was resolute. This was no longer just about the beach house. This was about holding her sister accountable for everything she had done. "Rachel," Sarah began, her voice calm but firm, "you sold the house illegally, and now I have the proof." Rachel shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. "Sarah, you don't understand," she said, her voice shaky. "I had no choice. The bills, the debts, Ben, and I needed the money." Ben's jaw clenched, and Sarah could see the faintest flicker of guilt in his eyes. But it was too late for excuses. Sarah slid the documents across the table. "The deed was amended years ago, Rachel. It clearly states that the property cannot be sold without both heirs agreeing. You had no right to sell it. You knew that." Rachel's face flushed as she scanned the documents, her fingers trembling as they traced over the legal language. She didn't have an answer, not anymore. The truth was laid bare before her. "Not only did you violate the will," Sarah continued, her tone unwavering, "but you also mismanaged the funds. And there's more to this story that you haven't told me." At the mention of mismanagement, Ben's demeanor changed. His once calm facade cracked, revealing a much darker side. "That's enough," he snapped, standing up abruptly. "This is all just a misunderstanding." But Sarah wasn't backing down. "I'm not finished. There are millions of dollars tied up in this estate, and I have evidence of your involvement in a failed real estate deal, using estate funds to cover your own debts." The room fell silent as the weight of Sarah's words settled in. Rachel's eyes welled with tears, and for a moment, Sarah wondered if her sister would finally come clean. But instead, Rachel turned to her husband, her voice barely a whisper. "Ben, tell her we did it for us, for our future." Ben didn't speak. He couldn't. His silence spoke volumes. Sarah knew then that this wasn't just about a property dispute. It was about something much deeper: greed, lies, and a broken family. But this fight wasn't just legal anymore, it was personal. "I'm taking control of the estate," Sarah declared, standing tall. "You're no longer the executor. The beach house, the funds, everything, it's mine to manage from here on out." The room exploded with chaos. Rachel stood up, her voice rising in a desperate plea. "You can't just take everything. This is our family." But Sarah was unwavering. "You had your chance. Now it's mine to fix." With that, Rachel and Ben stormed out of the office, their marriage hanging by a thread. Sarah sat back in her chair, the weight of what had just happened settling over her. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. As Sarah left the lawyer's office, she glanced at the beach house documents in her hand. The battle for the inheritance had just begun. But there was something bigger at play now. Sarah had the power, but Rachel's secrets, hidden deep in the past, were beginning to unravel. The true story was just beginning to surface, and Sarah knew that nothing could prepare her for what was to come next. The taste of victory was fleeting for Sarah. As much as she had hoped the legal confrontation would put everything to rest, the aftermath of the showdown only left her with more questions and more revelations. Rachel may have lost her role as the executor of the estate, but her tangled web of lies and mismanagement was far from being unraveled. In the weeks following the meeting, Sarah began to dig deeper into the financials of the estate. It was clear that Rachel and Ben had been using the inheritance funds for personal gain. But just how far had they gone? Sarah sat in her office late one night, scanning through the spreadsheets and bank statements she had requested from the estate's accounts. Her eyes widened as she stumbled upon an entry for a massive withdrawal, one that didn't match any of the estate's approved expenses. It was a payment to a luxury car dealership. Another transaction was for an overseas vacation, a casual trip to a 5-star resort in the Caribbean, charged to the estate's funds. Her heart sank. The more she looked, the more she realized that the mismanagement was deliberate. Rachel had dipped into the funds for her personal luxuries, all while claiming the estate was in danger of going under. And Ben, ever the enabler, had supported it every step of the way. But the worst part, the failed real estate venture. Sarah found evidence that Ben had orchestrated an investment using the estate's money, a project that had gone belly up, leaving them with massive losses. Worse still, the partners involved in the deal were all linked to Ben's shady business dealings from years past. It was clear now. Rachel and Ben had used the beach house and the inheritance it represented as a means to cover their own financial misdeeds. But as Sarah prepared to confront them with this new information, another layer of deceit revealed itself. The estate attorney, Mr. Daniels, had been hesitant to speak up, but when Sarah pushed him, he reluctantly shared a critical piece of information. "There's more to the story, Sarah. Your grandmother was suspicious of Rachel's financial habits even before she passed. She was always careful with the estate's money, and I suspect she anticipated something like this happening." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Her grandmother had known. Had she foreseen Rachel's betrayal, even down to the financial ruin she was trying to avoid? Sarah called Rachel the next day, demanding a meeting. Rachel agreed, but the tension between them was palpable as soon as they sat down. Ben was predictably absent, likely hiding away from the mess he'd created. "Rachel," Sarah began, her voice controlled but stern, "I've gone through the estate's financial records. I know what you've done. The luxury purchases, the vacation, but most importantly, the failed real estate investment. You've used the estate's money for your own gain, and it's unacceptable." Rachel's face flushed crimson as she fumbled for an excuse. "Sarah, I didn't know what else to do. Ben promised me it would work out. I didn't think it would get this bad." "That's not good enough, Rachel," Sarah replied coldly. "You not only betrayed the trust of this family, but you've also endangered everything our grandmother worked so hard to build." Rachel's shoulders slumped as she looked down, her guilt written all over her face. I never meant for it to get this far. But I was desperate. We were desperate. Ben had these ideas, these investments that we thought would save everything. But now it's all falling apart. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. There was still something deeper at play here, something she didn't fully understand. Why had Rachel gone so far to protect Ben? What kind of hold did he have over her? Before she could press further, Rachel let out a defeated sigh. There's an insurance policy, Sarah, one that Grandma set up just in case something like this happened. But it's not simple. There are conditions, financial counseling, and Ben has to be removed from all estate matters. This was the first piece of hope Sarah had gotten in weeks. The policy could protect the estate, but only if they could meet the requirements. But Rachel's next words only deepened the mystery. I don't think Ben will agree to that, she muttered, barely meeting Sarah's eyes. And I don't think he's going to take it well. If we're going to fix this, we're going to need to do it quickly. Sarah left the meeting, her mind filled with new questions. The insurance policy was a lifeline, but would Ben go along with the conditions? And more importantly, would Rachel be able to redeem herself? Or was she too far gone into the depths of Ben's financial games? With a sense of grim determination, Sarah prepared for the next battle. The road ahead was unclear, and she knew she couldn't trust Rachel or Ben, but she wasn't about to give up the beach house that had always been the heart of their family legacy. The financial scandal was far from over. The storm inside Sarah's mind raged as she drove back to her office, the conversation with Rachel echoing in her ears. An insurance policy. It sounded like the lifeline they desperately needed to salvage the beach house and what little remained of their family's legacy. But the conditions, financial counseling for Rachel and the removal of Ben from all matters regarding the estate. Could this really be the answer? Or was it just another trap in their endless cycle of deceit? Sarah knew that she needed more information. If the policy was as important as Rachel claimed, then she would need to find a way to make Ben comply. But how? Ben had a way of twisting things, manipulating situations to his favor. He was a master at making people doubt themselves. She arranged a meeting with Mr. Daniels, the estate attorney, to discuss the insurance policy. He had been the family's lawyer for decades, and though Sarah had always trusted him, she couldn't shake the feeling that there were still pieces of the puzzle missing. Was he truly on her side? Or was he just as entangled in this web as Rachel and Ben? As she entered his office, Mr. Daniels greeted her with a somber look. "You've learned about the policy, haven't you?" Sarah nodded. "I need to understand everything about it, how it works, the conditions, and why Rachel hasn't told me more." She seemed reluctant, almost afraid. Mr. Daniels hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Your grandmother was very meticulous about the estate. She foresaw that something like this could happen, and she wanted to ensure that the house and the legacy would be protected from any irresponsible decisions. The policy is indeed a lifeline, but it's not a simple fix. Your grandmother had very specific conditions for its activation." Sarah leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What conditions?" "The policy covers any financial losses incurred by the estate, but only if the funds are used for the estate's benefit. And, as Rachel mentioned, there's the requirement of financial counseling. But the most important part is the clause that removes anyone who has mismanaged the estate's funds from involvement. That means Ben must be cut off entirely." Sarah felt a surge of hope. This was it. This was the key to everything. If Ben was out of the picture, Rachel could finally make the right decisions, and Sarah could begin to restore their family's name. But then Mr. Daniels dropped the bombshell. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice low. "If Ben refuses to cooperate, and if Rachel refuses to follow through with the counseling, the policy becomes void. The estate loses everything." Sarah's stomach churned. It was a high-risk game now. If Ben refused, the entire family legacy could crumble. She had to find a way to convince him, but she wasn't sure he'd ever cooperate. And what about Rachel? She had proven unreliable time and time again. Could Sarah really count on her to step up? "We'll need to confront them both," Sarah said, her voice firm. "And we'll need to do it quickly." With the weight of the situation on her shoulders, Sarah prepared for the next phase of her battle. She reached out to Rachel, asking for a private meeting. Her mind was set. They had to push Ben into a corner, expose his manipulations, and make him understand that this was their last chance to restore the estate. Rachel might not be the perfect ally, but for the sake of their grandmother's legacy, she would have to be enough. Rachel showed up at the meeting with an air of reluctance, her shoulders slumped as if she already knew what was coming. "Do you understand what's at stake here?" Sarah began, her tone cold but urgent. "The insurance policy is our only shot, Rachel. But we need Ben out of the equation. He has to be removed from everything. He's the reason we're in this mess in the first place." Rachel's face was pale, and she chewed on her lip nervously. "I don't know if he'll agree to that, Sarah. He won't go down without a fight, and I'm afraid of what he might do." "We don't have a choice," Sarah replied. "If he refuses, the estate will be lost. Do you want that, Rachel? Do you want to watch everything crumble because of him?" Rachel looked away, struggling with her emotions. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll talk to him. I'll try, but you need to be prepared for him to push back." Sarah's heart sank, but she held her ground. "We have to do this. For Grandma, for the beach house, for everything we've worked for." With Rachel's reluctant agreement, Sarah set her plan into motion. The next few days would be crucial. Either they would succeed in taking control of the estate and the beach house, or they would lose it all. In the days that followed, Sarah's phone rang late one evening. It was Rachel. "He's refusing," she said, her voice strained. "He's not going to walk away from this. He says it's either all or nothing." The weight of the situation was crushing. If Ben refused to cooperate, there would be no turning back. Everything they'd worked for would be lost, and the family legacy would be shattered. But Sarah wasn't about to back down now. The fight was far from over. It was early morning when Sarah received the call from Rachel. There was no time for pleasantries, only urgency, and a tone that Sarah had never heard from her sister before. "I've had enough," Rachel said, voice trembling. "Ben's not just refusing the insurance policy conditions. He's threatening to sell the remaining estate assets. I can't take this anymore, Sarah. I need your help. I need to make things right." The call sent a ripple of disbelief through Sarah's chest. After everything, Rachel was finally admitting the truth. Her marriage, her choices, the way she'd been swept away by Ben's control. It had all come crashing down. And now, after so many missteps, Rachel wanted to redeem herself. Sarah sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This was the moment they'd both been waiting for, the pivotal turning point. Rachel's admission was the first step in the right direction, but it was just the beginning. They had to work together, and this time, they had to get it right. The sisters agreed to meet the following afternoon. As Sarah arrived at Rachel's apartment, she was struck by the heavy silence that surrounded them. There was no more pretense of the glamorous life Rachel had once enjoyed. The apartment was bare, almost too quiet for comfort. Rachel was sitting on the edge of the sofa, looking fragile, like she was on the edge of a precipice. "I don't know how to fix this, Sarah," Rachel said softly. "I've made so many mistakes, and now it feels like I'm running out of time. Ben won't let go. He thinks I'll just roll over and let him take everything. I don't know what to do anymore." Sarah took a deep breath, her anger and resentment simmering just beneath the surface, but she pushed it all aside. This wasn't about the past. It was about the future and what they still had left to salvage. "We fix it by standing up, Rachel. We fix it by taking control of what's ours, and we do it the right way. We can't let Ben win, not like this." Rachel wiped her eyes and nodded. "Okay, let's do it." The sisters spent the next few days working tirelessly, revisiting the estate's financial records, meeting with Mr. Daniels to ensure the insurance policy's conditions were airtight, and strategizing the best way to confront Ben once and for all. It was exhausting, but Sarah could see a change in Rachel. There was a newfound determination in her eyes, a glimpse of the woman she could have been all along, had she not been blinded by Ben's manipulation. On the day of the final confrontation, Sarah and Rachel stood side by side in the living room of the beach house, now half renovated but still far from complete. They'd called Ben to a meeting, demanding he come and face them. His refusal to meet their conditions had gone too far, and now there was no more room for negotiation. Ben arrived with a sneer, his usual arrogance in full display. He looked from one sister to the other, as if he were sizing them up, ready for battle. "You think you can just take control of everything?" Ben scoffed, his voice laced with disdain. "This house, this family, it's all mine. I've invested too much to just walk away." Sarah stood tall, her heart steady. "Not anymore. You're out of this, Ben. No more games. The insurance policy has been activated, and the terms are non-negotiable. You're not part of the future anymore. You're not in control." Rachel, now resolute, stepped forward. "I've made mistakes, Ben. I won't pretend otherwise. But I've learned, and I'm ready to rebuild, to start fresh. But not with you. Not anymore. I won't let you drag us down any longer." Ben's face twisted with rage. "You think I'm just going to walk away? You'll regret this." But Sarah and Rachel stood firm, their resolve unshaken. There was no turning back now. They had made their decision. It was time for Ben to face the consequences of his actions. As Ben stormed out of the room, swearing under his breath, the sisters exchanged a look, one filled with both sadness and relief. The fight wasn't over, but they had just taken the first step toward redemption. With Ben out of the picture, Rachel's path to healing began. She enrolled in financial counseling, committing to the process no matter how difficult it became. For the first time in a long time, she felt the weight of the future in her hands, and she was determined to make things right. Sarah watched her sister with a mixture of pride and caution. She knew that redemption wasn't a straight line. There would be setbacks, failures, and moments of doubt, but as long as Rachel was willing to fight for a better future, Sarah would stand beside her. Together they started the long road to restoring the beach house, piece by piece, brick by brick. It was a symbol of everything they had lost, and everything they hoped to rebuild. And as the days passed, Sarah couldn't help but think of their grandmother. Her wisdom, her foresight, had guided them both through this storm. The beach house wasn't just a physical space, it was a legacy, a reminder of the strength that came from family, from resilience, and from redemption. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in years, Sarah felt hopeful. They had a chance to rebuild their lives and the beach house that had meant so much to their grandmother. And that, she realized, was worth fighting for. The road to redemption had begun. The sun was setting over the beach house, casting a warm glow over the freshly restored property. The once dilapidated house, with its cracked windows and faded charm, now stood proudly with a new coat of paint, a repaired roof, and a beautifully landscaped garden that Rachel had personally designed. It wasn't just the house that had been rebuilt. It was their relationship, their future, and the very foundation of who they were as sisters. Sarah stood in the doorway, looking out at the horizon. The journey had been long and fraught with obstacles, but as she watched Rachel walking across the lawn, a soft smile playing on her lips, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. They had made it through the worst, and now they were on the verge of something new, something better. It was the day of the ceremony to honor their grandmother, and the sisters had invited close friends and family to celebrate the restoration of the beach house. It was a small gathering, but it felt significant, like the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Rachel had come a long way in the past few months. She was no longer the woman who had hidden behind Ben's manipulations. She was someone who had faced her mistakes, worked hard to redeem herself, and now stood proudly in her own light. Her part-time job as a landscape designer had given her a sense of purpose, and her commitment to financial counseling showed she was determined to make a fresh start. As Sarah and Rachel stood together on the porch, watching the guests arrive, Rachel turned to her sister, her eyes filled with emotion. "I never thought I'd get here, Sarah," she said quietly. "I thought I'd lost everything. But this feels like a second chance. Like I'm finally seeing things clearly." Sarah smiled and placed a hand on Rachel's shoulder. "You've earned it. You've worked hard to make things right, and I'm proud of you. We're in this together, always." Rachel nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. She had made mistakes, but now she was moving forward with her head held high. And for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The ceremony began, and the guests gathered in the living room of the beach house, which had been transformed into a place of warmth and celebration. The atmosphere was one of joy, not just for the house, but for the journey the sisters had been through. They had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and financial ruin, but they had come out stronger on the other side. Rachel stepped up to the small podium, her hands slightly trembling, but her voice steady. "I stand here today, not just in front of all of you, but in front of my grandmother's memory," Rachel began, her voice clear and sincere. "This house has always been a symbol of family, love, and legacy. And while I've made mistakes, huge ones, I've learned that it's never too late to start over. I've hurt people I love, but I'm working every day to make things right." Sarah watched as Rachel spoke, her heart swelling with pride. This wasn't just about a house. It was about redemption, forgiveness, and the power of family to heal even the deepest wounds. Rachel continued, her voice stronger now. "I want to thank Sarah for standing by me, for never giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it. You've shown me what it means to fight for what's right, to fight for family, and for that, I'll be forever grateful." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she listened. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when Rachel finally took responsibility for her actions and made a promise to herself and to their family. It was a promise of growth, of healing, and of moving forward. As the ceremony ended, the guests gathered outside to toast to the future. The beach house, once a symbol of betrayal and loss, had now become a beacon of hope and new beginnings. Sarah and Rachel stood side by side, holding glasses filled with champagne, watching the sunset. "We did it," Rachel whispered. "We did," Sarah agreed, her voice full of emotion. They had been through so much, but now standing there together, they knew that the hard work was worth it. The beach house wasn't just a place, it was a symbol of everything they had overcome. And as the sisters looked out over the horizon, they knew that they were ready for whatever the future held. Together, the story of betrayal, revenge, and redemption had come full circle. But this was only the beginning. A new chapter was unfolding, one where love, forgiveness, and second chances would guide them forward. And as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah and Rachel shared a quiet moment of reflection. They had faced their demons, rebuilt their lives, and had found the strength to start anew. The road had been long, but it had led them to this moment, a moment of peace and the promise of a brighter future. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt that everything was going to be okay.